The year was 1928, and the relentless pulse of the jazz age still throbbed through the heart of New York City. But for Eleanor Vance, the music had long since faded, replaced by the quiet, persistent hum of grief. At 32, she was a widow of the Great War, a member of a generation of women who had given their husbands to the fields of France and had been left to navigate a changed world alone. Her husband, a kind, gentle man named Robert, had been taken by the last wave of influenza in a field hospital just weeks before the armistice, leaving her with a cherished photograph, a stack of loving letters, and a heart full of memories that were beginning to feel like ghosts. For 10 years she had survived. She had worked as a seamstress, her fingers nimble and her work precise, earning just enough to keep her small, respectable apartment in a quiet corner of Brooklyn. It was a lonely life, but a peaceful one. That peace, however, had been shattered when the textile company that employed her and dozens of other women had abruptly declared bankruptcy, a quiet casualty of the city's relentless churn of progress and competition. Now, with her meager savings dwindling, Eleanor found herself in a position she had never imagined, seeking a position as a live-in housekeeper. Her pride chafed at the thought of servitude, but her pragmatism won out. She was a capable woman, an excellent cook, and meticulous in her habits. It was honest work. The advertisement she answered in the New York Times was brief and devoid of detail. Housekeeper wanted for large estate on the Hudson. Must be quiet, capable, and comfortable with solitude. References required. Apply by letter to P.O. Box 72. After a brief, formal correspondence conducted entirely through a law firm, she was, to her own surprise, offered the position. The employer, she was told, was a Mr. Alistair Blackwood, a wealthy widower who valued his privacy above all else. The salary was generous, and the duties were simple: manage the household and prepare 3 meals a day. The contract was for 1 year. And so, on a grey, overcast Tuesday in late autumn, Eleanor found herself in a hired car, travelling north out of the city, her few belongings packed in a single suitcase. As the car turned onto a long private drive, she got her first glimpse of her new home. It was a magnificent stone mansion, built in a severe Gothic style, perched on a rise of land overlooking the Hudson River. It was a house of immense size and grandeur, but it had an air of profound, unshakable loneliness. It looked like a place where echoes went to die. A stern, silent butler named Jennings greeted her at the door. He led her through a cavernous, dimly lit foyer, the only sound the soft tap of their shoes on the polished marble floor. The house was immaculate, but it felt sterile, unlived in. It was a museum of a life, not a home. "Mr. Blackwood will dine at 8 o'clock this evening, Mrs. Vance," Jennings said, his voice a dry rustle. He used her married name as she had requested, a small shield against the world. He prefers simple, traditional fare. He will take his meals alone in the main dining room. Your primary duty is to ensure the smooth running of the household. You will find that Mr. Blackwood does not wish to be disturbed. He showed her to her rooms, a comfortable suite that was larger than her entire Brooklyn apartment, and then to the enormous, gleaming and clearly unused kitchen. And that was it. She was the new keeper of a silent, empty house, hired to cook for a man she had not even met. For the first 3 days, Alistair Blackwood was a ghost in his own home. Eleanor would hear the faint sound of his footsteps in the hallway late at night, or catch a glimpse of his tall, shadowy figure in the library as she passed. She would prepare his meals, a simple roasted chicken, a hearty beef stew, and a silent maid would carry the tray to the dining room. Later, the tray would be retrieved, the food barely touched. She began to feel as if she were the housekeeper for a phantom. Her days were spent in the echoing silence of the grand house, her only companions the stern butler, and a handful of other servants who moved with a quiet, almost fearful deference. On the 4th evening, Eleanor decided she could not bear the silence any longer. She had prepared a pot roast, a dish that filled the cold kitchen with the warm, comforting scent of her own childhood. When the maid came to collect the tray for Mr. Blackwood, Eleanor spoke up. "I will take it to him myself," she said, her voice firm. The maid looked at her with wide, alarmed eyes. "But Mrs. Vance, he does not like to be disturbed." "He is my employer," Eleanor replied calmly. and I am his cook. I wish to ensure the meal is to his satisfaction." With a determined heart, she lifted the heavy silver tray and carried it to the main dining room. The room was vast, dominated by a table that could seat 40. At the far end, illuminated by a single candelabra, sat Alistair Blackwood. He was a man in his early 40s with dark hair threaded with premature silver at the temples and a handsome, angular face that seemed carved from stone. He was staring out the large window at the dark river, his expression one of deep, brooding melancholy. He did not look up as she approached. She set the tray down on the table beside him. "I have brought your dinner, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. He started as if pulled from a trance and turned to look at her. His eyes were the color of a stormy sea, and they held a pain so profound it made her breath catch. "I was not expecting you," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. It was not angry, merely surprised. "I was concerned the food was not to your liking," she said simply. "You have not eaten much these past few days." He looked down at the perfectly prepared plate of pot roast, carrots and potatoes, as if seeing food for the first time. "I have not had much of an appetite." "Grief is a poor dining companion," she said quietly. His head snapped up, his stormy eyes locking onto hers. He saw no pity in her gaze, only a quiet, knowing empathy. He saw a woman who was not a servant, but an equal, a fellow traveler in the lonely landscape of loss. For the first time since she had arrived, a flicker of life, of genuine interest entered his eyes. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice no longer a command, but a quiet request. Hesitantly, she sat, and in the vast empty dining room, illuminated by the soft flickering light of the candles, the lonely widower and the woman he had hired only to cook shared their first meal. A quiet, fragile truce declared against the silence that had reigned for so long. The vast dining room, which for so long had been a silent tomb for one, now held the quiet, tentative energy of two. Alistair Kane, a man who had not shared a meal with another person at this table in over 5 years, found himself studying the woman who sat opposite him. He had hired her to cook, a simple, functional requirement. He had not anticipated her quiet courage, nor the unnerving way her empathetic gaze seemed to see past the walls he had so carefully constructed. "How you said grief is a poor dining companion," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "You speak from experience, Mrs. Vance." It was a question disguised as a statement. Eleanor looked down at her hands, which were resting in her lap. "I do, sir. My husband, Robert, was taken in the last days of the war, not by a bullet but by the influenza that followed. Sometimes I think that was the crueler fate." Alistair nodded slowly, a deep, shared understanding passing between them. "The war created many ghosts," he said, his own voice tinged with a familiar sorrow. "My wife, Isabel. It was a sudden illness, a fever that the doctors could not name. 1 week she was here, filling this house with her laughter. The next—" He trailed off, the words unnecessary. In that moment of shared vulnerability, the dynamic between them shifted irrevocably. They were no longer just a master and his housekeeper. They were two veterans of loss, two people who understood the unique topography of a broken heart. The rest of the meal passed in a new kind of silence. It was not empty, but filled with a quiet, mutual respect. When the meal was over, and Eleanor stood to clear the plates, Alistair spoke again. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his tone still formal, but with a new underlying note of sincerity. "Tomorrow evening, I would be grateful if you would join me again." "Of course, Mr. Blackwood," she replied softly. And so a new routine was born. Every evening at 8 o'clock they would dine together. Their conversations were never intrusive. They spoke of books they had both read, of the changing seasons in the Hudson Valley, of the news from the city papers. They were like two cautious diplomats from foreign countries, slowly, carefully, learning each other's language. Emboldened by this new fragile connection, Eleanor began to see her role as more than just a cook or a cleaner. She saw a house that was drowning in sorrow, and her practical, nurturing spirit could not let it be. She began in small ways to bring it back to life. She started with the curtains. The heavy, dark velvet drapes that shrouded every window were taken down, cleaned, and replaced with lighter fabrics that allowed the autumn sunlight to pour into the rooms, chasing away the perpetual gloom. She found a neglected greenhouse at the back of the property, its glass panes clouded with grime. She spent a day cleaning it and discovered, to her delight, several resilient rose bushes and hardy chrysanthemums still clinging to life. She began to tend to them, and soon small vases of fresh flowers began to appear on the tables and mantelpieces of the mansion, their vibrant color a quiet rebellion against the house's somber palette. She uncovered the furniture in the main parlor, freeing the beautiful sofas and chairs from their white, ghost-like shrouds. She polished the wood until it gleamed and arranged the furniture into cozy, inviting, conversational groups around the fireplace. She was not just cleaning a house, she was coaxing it back to life, inviting it to be a home again. Alistair noticed every change. At first, he was unsettled. The house had been a perfect, unchanging monument to his grief. Eleanor's gentle ministrations were a disruption, a quiet insistence that life could and should go on. He would walk into the sun-drenched parlor and feel a pang of an emotion he couldn't name, a mixture of guilt for disturbing the memory of his late wife and a surprising, undeniable feeling of peace. The house was beginning to feel less like a tomb and more like a sanctuary. He found her one afternoon in the magnificent library, a room he had avoided for years. She was not cleaning, but was standing on a ladder, her back to him, carefully running a soft cloth over the leather spines of the books on a high shelf. "This room has been neglected," she said, without turning, as if she had sensed his presence. "Books need to be cared for or they grow sad." "My wife, she loved this room," he said, his voice quiet. Eleanor turned on the ladder to look at him. "I can feel that," she said gently. "It's why it deserves to be cared for." "It's not about erasing her memory, Mr. Blackwood. It's about honoring it." Her wisdom, so simple and so profound, struck him. He had treated his wife's memory like a fragile, breakable artifact to be locked away in the dark. Eleanor was suggesting it was a living thing that needed light and air to thrive. From that day on, the library became their common ground. He would come in the evenings to find her there, meticulously cataloguing the vast collection. He would sit in a leather armchair by the fire, pretending to read his own book, but he would find himself watching her instead. He loved the quiet competence of her hands, the focused, intelligent expression on her face. One evening, he came home from a difficult trip to the city to find the house filled with an aroma that stopped him in his tracks. It was the warm, comforting scent of freshly baked apple pie. It was a smell he hadn't encountered in years, a smell that was tied viscerally to the happiest memories of his childhood, of his mother's kitchen. He followed the scent, a man in a trance, down the long corridor and into the one room in the house he never entered, the kitchen. He found Eleanor there, her face slightly flushed from the heat of the oven, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She was sliding the beautiful, golden brown pie from the oven. She looked up, startled to see him standing in the doorway. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her eyes wide with surprise. "I apologize. I had a craving for a taste of home. I hope you don't mind." He didn't speak. He simply walked over to the kitchen table and sat down, an act so out of character it stunned them both. He looked at the pie and then at her. For the first time, a genuine, unguarded smile touched his lips, reaching all the way to his stormy, sad eyes. "My mother's apple pie," he said, his voice a soft murmur of wonder. "It was my favorite thing in the world." He looked at her, his smile widening slightly. "How did you know?" "I didn't," she said, a corresponding smile gracing her own lips. In the warm, fragrant kitchen, a room that had been cold and functional for years, the lonely widower and the woman he had hired only to cook shared a slice of pie. It was a simple, domestic act. But for two people who had lived so long in the shadows of their own grief, it was a profound communion, a taste of a new life, a shared, unexpected, and wonderfully warm taste of home. The kitchen, once the sole domain of servants, became a surprising new center of the house. Alistair found himself drawn there in the evenings, not just by the comforting aromas of Eleanor's cooking, but by her quiet, steady presence. He would sit at the large wooden work table, ostensibly reading the evening paper, but in truth he was watching her. He was fascinated by the efficient grace of her movements, the gentle way she handled the ingredients, transforming simple flour and butter into something that felt like home. Their dinners were now long, lingering affairs, filled with easy conversation. He spoke of his business, of the intricate dance of global shipping and finance, finding in her an intelligent and surprisingly astute listener. She spoke of her life in Brooklyn, of the books she loved, of her late husband, Robert. She spoke of him not with sorrow, but with a gentle, fond nostalgia that Alistair found deeply comforting. They were two people who had known profound love and devastating loss, and in that shared history, they found a unique and powerful connection. The house continued to awaken under Eleanor's care. She did not change its essential character, but simply polished away the years of neglect, allowing its inherent beauty to shine through. She discovered that Alistair's late wife, Isabel, had been a talented pianist, and with Alistair's hesitant permission, she began to air out the music room, dusting the grand piano and filling the space with flowers. She could not play herself, but she felt that the beautiful instrument should not sit in silent mourning forever. Alistair's life, which had been a rigid, predictable routine of work and solitude, was now filled with small, unexpected moments of warmth. He was changing. The deep, weary lines around his eyes seemed to be softening, and the house staff, long accustomed to his grim silence, would occasionally hear the sound of his low, rumbling laughter coming from the kitchen or the library. This fragile new peace was tested by the intrusion of the outside world. Alistair, for all his reclusiveness, was still the head of a formidable business empire. A crucial deal, one that had been in the works for over a year, was reaching its final stages. It involved a partnership with a skeptical consortium of British investors who were essential for a planned expansion into Europe. Their leader, a shrewd and cautious man named Sir Reginald Croft, had made a final non-negotiable demand. Before signing the papers, he and his two partners wished to dine with Mr. Blackwood at his home. The request sent Alistair into a state of quiet, cold panic. It was a common practice in his world, a way for men to gauge the character of a potential partner outside the sterile confines of a boardroom. But for Alistair, the thought of hosting these men, of making small talk, of being observed and judged in his own sanctuary, was a personal nightmare. He retreated into himself, the old, familiar shadows creeping back into his eyes. For 2 days, he was silent and distant, and the warmth in the house seemed to cool several degrees. Eleanor felt his withdrawal like a physical ache. She finally confronted him one evening in the library. "So you're going to cancel the dinner, aren't you?" she said softly. He did not look at her, his gaze fixed on the fire. "It is an unnecessary risk. My lawyers can finalize the details." "This isn't about details, Alistair, and you know it," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "This is a test of character. If you refuse to meet them, they will see it as a weakness. They will think the rumors about you are true, that you are an unstable recluse. You will lose the deal." "Let me lose it then," he said, his voice tight. "It is only money." "No," she countered, stepping closer. "It is your family's legacy. It is the livelihood of the thousands of people who work for you. You cannot let them down because you are afraid of a dinner party." She paused, her voice softening. "You are not afraid of them, Alistair. You are afraid of being the man you used to be, the lonely man in the empty house. But you are not that man anymore." He finally looked at her, his stormy eyes full of a desperate, warring conflict. "You will not be alone," she said, her voice a steady anchor. "I will be there. We will do this together." And so, the dinner was set. Eleanor took charge of the preparations with the quiet efficiency of a field marshal. She did not plan a menu of ostentatious, French-inspired dishes that would be found in any high society ballroom. Instead, she planned a meal that was a reflection of the Hudson Valley and of Alistair himself. A hearty, elegant menu of roasted duck, wild mushroom risotto, and a simple, perfect apple tart for dessert, using ingredients from local farms. She filled the dining room not with massive, formal bouquets, but with simple, beautiful arrangements of autumn leaves and wildflowers from the estate's own grounds. She was creating an atmosphere not of intimidating wealth, but of authentic, grounded elegance. The night of the dinner, Alistair was a bundle of nerves. He paced his study, his usual composure gone. Eleanor came to him just before the guests were due to arrive. She was wearing a simple but beautiful gown of deep burgundy silk, her presence calming and radiant. She wordlessly straightened his tie and smoothed the lapels of his jacket. "Just be yourself, Alistair," she whispered. "The man I have come to know, honest, intelligent, and kind. They will not be able to resist him." He took a deep breath, his hand finding hers and squeezing it gratefully. "I am beginning to think," he murmured, "that you are a sorceress, Mrs. Vance." When Sir Reginald Croft and his partners arrived, they were greeted not by a cold, intimidating tycoon, but by a quiet, dignified gentleman and his warm, gracious hostess. Alistair was tense at first, his conversation stilted. But Eleanor masterfully guided the evening. She drew him out with gentle questions, turning the conversation to topics she knew he was passionate about, the history of the region, the rare books in his library. She spoke to their guests with an easy, unpretentious charm. She did not pretend to be a woman of their station. She was simply herself. She spoke of the food with a cook's genuine passion, telling them about the local farm where she had sourced the vegetables. She charmed them with her quiet wit and her genuine interest in their own lives and travels. The British investors, who had arrived expecting to meet a strange, brooding eccentric, were utterly disarmed. They saw not a cold, empty mansion, but a warm, beautiful home. They saw not an unstable recluse, but a thoughtful, brilliant man who was supported by an equally intelligent and capable partner. The genuine affection and seamless partnership between Alistair and Eleanor were more impressive than any financial report. After a successful dinner, the men retired to the study to sign the final papers. As Eleanor cleared the dessert plates, Sir Reginald's wife, a kind elderly woman named Lady Croft, came into the dining room. "My dear," she said, taking Eleanor's hand, "you are a remarkable woman. I must confess we were concerned about this partnership, the rumors about Mr. Blackwood. But tonight I have seen a man who is not just a brilliant industrialist, but a happy man, and it is very clear that you are the reason for that." Later that night, after the guests had departed, their signatures secured on the lucrative contract, Alistair found Eleanor in the kitchen, quietly washing the last of the fine china by hand. He came to stand beside her, taking the dish towel from her hand and beginning to dry. "The deal would have failed without you tonight," he said, his voice full of a quiet awe. "You did not just host a dinner, Eleanor. You conducted a symphony. You managed them all with a grace and wisdom that it left me speechless." He turned to her, his expression serious. "I hired you to care for my home, but you have done so much more. You have become its heart." He reached out, his hand gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "The contract I signed was for a housekeeper. But the woman I have come to love is my partner in every sense of the word." His use of the word love, spoken so quietly, so simply, in the warm, familiar space of the kitchen, made her own heart stop. The journey from a desperate widow seeking employment to the cherished partner of this incredible man was complete. The house was no longer empty, and neither was his heart. The warmth of the kitchen, usually a comforting and familiar embrace, suddenly felt charged with an electric, unspoken energy. Alistair's words, "The woman I have come to love," hung in the quiet space between them, a declaration so profound and unexpected it seemed to make the very air shimmer. Elsie's heart, which had been beating with the quiet satisfaction of a successful evening, now hammered against her ribs with a wild, hopeful rhythm. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his for confirmation, for clarity. The face she saw was one she had come to know intimately, yet it was transformed. The usual melancholy in his stormy grey eyes had been replaced by a raw, open vulnerability, and a look of such tender, unguarded affection that it took her breath away. "I meant what I said, Eleanor," he said softly, his voice a low murmur that was for her alone. He took a step closer, closing the small distance between them. "When I hired you, I was a man living in a museum of my own making. This house was a monument to Isabel, to the life I had lost. I walked these halls like a ghost, and I thought that was all that was left for me." He reached out, his hand gently taking hers. His touch was warm and firm, a comforting anchor in the swirling sea of her emotions. But you did not just bring order to the rooms, you brought life. You opened the curtains and let in the sun. You filled the silence with your quiet presence, with the scent of baking bread, with the simple, beautiful sound of a home being lived in. He lifted her hand and held it between both of his. You did not try to erase my wife's memory. You honored it. And in doing so, you taught me that it was possible to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. You taught me how to live again. He took a deep breath, his gaze intense. I love you, Eleanor Vance. I love your quiet strength, your boundless compassion, and the beautiful, gentle soul that sees the world with such clarity. I love you. The words were a balm, a cure for wounds she hadn't even realized were still aching. The loneliness of her widowhood, the quiet shame of her poverty, the sting of a world that often made her feel invisible, all of it seemed to melt away under the warmth of his heartfelt confession. She had come here seeking only employment, a roof over her head. She had never in her wildest dreams imagined she would find love again. Tears of joy welled in her eyes. "Oh, Alistair," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I feel the same. I have come to care for you more than I can say. You are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever known. You saw me when no one else would. You treated me with respect and dignity from the very beginning. How could my heart not belong to you?" A slow, radiant smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, unadulterated happiness. He gently pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her in a protective, tender embrace. "Then it seems my house is not the only thing you have been mending," he murmured into her hair. He leaned back, his hands cupping her face. He looked into her eyes, and in their hazel depths, he saw his own love reflected back at him. And then he kissed her. It was their first true kiss as lovers, and it was everything a kiss should be. It was tender, a gentle exploration. It was deep with unspoken gratitude and the profound relief of two lonely souls finding their harbor. It was a promise of comfort, of partnership, of a shared future. It was the quiet, perfect culmination of a love that had grown slowly, surely, in the shared silences and quiet moments of their life together. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "The arrangement we have," he said, his voice husky, "is no longer sufficient. You are not my housekeeper, Eleanor. You are my partner, my confidant, my heart." He took her hand and led her from the warm kitchen, through the quiet sleeping house and into the library. The fire was still burning low in the hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow on the thousands of books that stood as silent witnesses to their evolving story. He stood before her in the firelight, his expression serious and full of a hopeful, nervous energy. "I hired you to care for this house," he said, "but now I am asking you to share it with me, as my wife, as my equal, as the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with." He took a small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a sapphire the color of a twilight sky, flanked by two small diamonds. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "She was a woman much like you, strong, kind, and possessed of a quiet wisdom. I can think of no one more worthy of wearing it." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "Eleanor Vance, will you do me the profound honor of becoming my wife?" The question, so impossible just months ago, now felt like the most natural, most right thing in the world. This house was no longer a place of employment, it was her home. And this man was no longer her employer, he was the keeper of her heart. "Yes," she whispered, her voice ringing with a joyful certainty that chased away the last of the shadows forever. "Yes, Alistair, I will marry you." He slid the beautiful ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. He then pulled her into his arms, and they stood together before the fire. Two souls no longer defined by the losses of their past, but by the infinite, hopeful promise of their shared future. The house was no longer empty, and their hearts were finally completely full. The days following their engagement were a blissful dream. The entire atmosphere of Blackwood Manor had been transformed, imbued with a light and warmth that had been absent for nearly a decade. The hushed, mournful silence was replaced by the sound of genuine laughter as Alistair and Eleanor planned their future together. They were a study in contrasts, yet a perfect partnership. He, with his methodical mind, would map out the practicalities, while she, with her empathetic heart, would infuse their plans with warmth and soul. They decided on a small private wedding to be held in the spring, in the manor's gardens, which were now flourishing under Eleanor's devoted care. The library was no longer a place of solitary study, but their shared space, where they would sit side by side in the evenings, reading, talking, and simply enjoying the profound comfort of each other's company. Alistair, the man who had forgotten how to live, was now fully awake. His world, once a monochrome of grief, now burst into vibrant color. But their idyllic sanctuary could not remain isolated from the world forever. Alistair was still the head of a massive financial empire. He made a trip to the city to meet with his board of directors and his team of lawyers to formally announce his impending marriage. He spoke of Eleanor with such pride and profound affection that the stern, business-minded men were left in a state of stunned admiration for the woman who had so clearly transformed their reclusive leader. The news, however, could not be contained within the discreet walls of a boardroom. Within a week, the story leaked to the press, and the gilded world that Alistair had so long despised turned its full, judgmental gaze upon them. It was Jennings who brought them the newspaper, his face a grim, stoic mask that could not quite conceal his own fury. He presented it to Alistair on a silver tray, as if delivering a death sentence. The paper was folded to the society page, dominated by the sharp-tongued, all-powerful gossip columnist Beatrice Blackwood, a distant, malicious cousin of Alistair's. The headline was a masterpiece of sophisticated cruelty. The Blackwood hermit has a cunning cook caught the city's most elusive tycoon. The article was venomous. It painted Eleanor as a conniving opportunist, a lowly servant who had used her position to prey on a grieving, vulnerable man. It dripped with condescending phrases, referring to her as the domestic and questioning her background and motives. It portrayed Alistair not as a man who had found love, but as an eccentric recluse who had fallen victim to a clever, ambitious woman far below his station. It was a calculated, brutal assault on the legitimacy of their love and on Eleanor's character. Alistair read the article, his face growing colder and harder with each word. When he finished, he slowly crumpled the paper in his fist, his knuckles white. A dangerous, arctic fury radiated from him, the likes of which Eleanor had not seen since the day she had first met him. "I will destroy her," he said, his voice a low, terrifying whisper. "I will sue this paper into bankruptcy. I will use every ounce of my power to see that this woman never writes another word in this city again." But Eleanor, looking at the cruel words on the page, felt a different emotion. It was not anger that washed over her, but a deep, familiar ache of humiliation. This was what she had always feared. In the eyes of his world, she would never be more than the help. The story, as twisted as it was, played on the very insecurities she had fought so hard to overcome. She felt the shame of her poverty, the stigma of her former position, all rushing back. She saw Alistair's rage, and she knew it was born of his love for her, his fierce desire to protect her. But she also saw the flaw in his plan. "No, Alistair," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He turned to her, his eyes blazing. "Did you read what she wrote? She has dragged your name, our name, through the mud." "Yes," Eleanor said, meeting his gaze. "And if you retaliate with lawsuits and public feuds, you will only prove her point. You will create the very scandal she is trying to invent. We will be front-page news for months, don't you see? That is exactly what she wants. She wants to draw you back into her dirty game, to pull you down to her level." He stared at her, his own fury momentarily checked by the clear, calm logic of her words. "I have been judged by people like her my entire life, Alistair," she continued, a new strength in her voice. "Their opinions are like poison gas. They only have power if you stay in the room and breathe it in. The way to defeat them is not to fight back with their own weapons. It is to rise above it. It is to show them that their opinions have no power over our happiness." She walked to him and took his clenched fist in her hands, gently uncurling his fingers from the crumpled newspaper. "We know the truth of our love. That is all that matters." "Then what do we do?" he asked, his anger beginning to subside, replaced by a grudging admiration for her wisdom. "We cannot simply let this stand." "No," she agreed, a determined glint in her eye. "We will not hide. We will do the opposite. We will host a party, an engagement ball right here. We will invite every single person on her wretched list. We will invite the columnist herself. We will open the doors of your home, and we will show them our truth with our own heads held high. We will not be victims in their story. We will be the authors of our own." The audacity of her plan was breathtaking. To face their detractors head-on, to invite their enemies into their home, it was a bold, terrifying, and utterly brilliant move. It was a declaration of war, but a war to be fought on their terms with their own weapons, dignity, grace, and the undeniable power of their love. A slow smile spread across Alistair's face, a look of pure, unadulterated pride. He looked at the woman before him, this former housekeeper, this quiet widow, and he saw a queen, a brilliant strategist with a warrior's heart. "An engagement ball," he mused, the idea taking root, "to formally announce our intentions to the world." "Precisely," she said. "Let them come and whisper. Let them stare. They will find nothing here but a man and a woman who are deeply in love and entirely unconcerned with their petty judgments." He pulled her into his arms, his heart swelling with a love that was now mingled with a profound, soul-deep respect. "You are a genius, Eleanor Vance," he murmured into her hair, "a terrifyingly brilliant genius, and you are to be my wife." The battle lines were drawn. The scandal had broken, but instead of retreating, they had chosen to advance. The grand, silent manor on the Hudson was about to become the stage for the most anticipated social showdown of the season. The night of the engagement ball arrived cloaked in a crisp, star-filled sky. Blackwood Manor, for the first time in a decade, was ablaze with light. Every window glowed with a warm, welcoming luminescence, a beacon of defiance against the shadowy whispers of the city. A stream of gleaming automobiles snaked its way up the long drive, delivering the very architects of New York society to the doorstep of the man they had dubbed a hermit. They came expecting a spectacle of social ruin. Alistair and Eleanor were determined to give them a lesson in the nature of true class. Upstairs in her suite, Eleanor stood before the mirror, her heart a steady, determined drumbeat. The reflection that stared back at her was of a woman she was only just beginning to know. She wore a gown of deep, luminous pearl grey silk, a colour of quiet confidence and unshakable dignity. It was a dress of exquisite simplicity, its elegant lines flowing gracefully, a testament to her own taste rather than the dictates of a fleeting fashion. Her only adornment was the beautiful sapphire ring on her finger. There was a soft knock at the door. It was Alistair. He entered, looking impossibly handsome and powerful in his black tailcoat. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw her. The look in his eyes, a mixture of awe, adoration, and profound love, was all the armor she would ever need. "Eleanor," he breathed, walking towards her. "You are the very definition of grace." He took her hands in his. "Are you ready?" "I am with you," she said, her voice clear and strong. "So, yes, I am ready for anything." Together, they descended the grand staircase. The foyer below was already filled with guests, a sea of shimmering jewels, rustling silks, and black tuxedos. As they appeared at the top of the stairs, a hush fell over the crowd, all eyes turning upwards. They were a striking couple. He, the dark, powerful tycoon returned from exile. She, the serene, beautiful woman whose presence radiated a quiet confidence that no gossip could tarnish. They moved through the ballroom, a united front. They greeted their guests with a calm, regal politeness. Alistair was a masterful host, his years of social exile seeming to have only sharpened his wit and his commanding presence. Eleanor stood by his side, his introductions making her role clear. "I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Eleanor Vance." The whispers still followed them, but now they were tinged with confusion and a grudging admiration. This was not the timid, out-of-place servant they had expected. This was a woman of substance. The inevitable confrontation came near the grand fireplace. Beatrice Blackwood, the venomous columnist, approached them, her smile as sharp and as cold as a shard of ice. "Alistair, darling," she purred, "what a brave little party." "And Mrs. Vance," she said, her eyes sweeping over Eleanor with theatrical condescension. "You've certainly tidied yourself up nicely. It's amazing what a bit of money can do." The insult was designed to be a public killing blow, to remind everyone of Eleanor's former station. But before Alistair could unleash the cold fury that was gathering in his eyes, Eleanor smiled, a serene and gentle expression. "Thank you, Beatrice," she said, her voice calm and clear. "It is amazing, isn't it? But not as amazing as what a bit of kindness can do. It can transform a house into a home and a lonely man into a happy one. It is a currency your columns seem to have very little familiarity with." Beatrice was left speechless, her mouth agape, utterly disarmed by Eleanor's graceful, perfectly aimed response. A ripple of stifled laughter went through the nearby guests. Later, when the party was in full swing, Alistair tapped a crystal glass for attention. The orchestra quieted, and a hush fell over the room. He stood with Eleanor's hand tucked securely in his arm. "Welcome, all of you, to my home," he began, his voice resonating with quiet power. "I know there has been a great deal of speculation about my life these past few years, and more recently about my engagement to this incredible woman beside me." He looked around the room, his gaze steady and fearless. "The papers have been filled with stories. They have called me a hermit. They have called Mrs. Vance an opportunist. They have crafted a narrative of scandal and manipulation." He paused. "They are wrong." He turned to look at Eleanor, his love for her a palpable force in the room. "For 10 years this house was a tomb, and I was its willing ghost, haunted by a past I could not escape. I had a house, but no home. I had wealth, but no joy. I was surrounded by beautiful things, but I had forgotten what beauty truly was." His eyes swept back over his guests. "And then Mrs. Vance came into my life. She was hired to be my cook, my housekeeper, a simple, contractual arrangement. But she did far more than care for my house. She cared for my soul. With her quiet dignity, her unwavering kindness, and her profound compassion, she reminded me that a home is not built of stone, but of shared moments. That a life is not measured by a bank balance, but by the love it contains." He lifted his champagne glass. "You see a woman you believe is beneath my station. I see the woman who saved me from myself. You see a servant who captured a millionaire. I see a queen who rescued a broken man. So yes, there is a story here. But it is not one of scandal, it is a story of redemption. Mine." He raised his glass high. "I ask you to join me in a toast. To my fiancée, my partner, my heart, and the true mistress of this house. To Eleanor." The sincerity in his voice, the raw, undeniable love in his eyes as he looked at her, was so powerful it silenced every whisper, every judgment. The room erupted in applause, a genuine thunderous ovation that was a surrender to the beautiful truth they had just witnessed. Alistair leaned down and whispered in her ear, "The battle, my love, is over." As the orchestra began to play a soft waltz, he led her to the center of the floor. He pulled her into his arms and they began to dance, moving as one in the center of the room. The world of whispers and judgments had faded away, leaving only the two of them. A man and a woman who had found in each other a love that was stronger than any scandal, a partnership that had turned a house of echoes into a home of love. The morning after the ball, a profound and peaceful quiet settled over Blackwood Manor. It was a silence utterly different from the oppressive, lonely stillness that had once defined the house. This was a silence of contentment, of resolution, the gentle quiet of a world that had found its proper center. The newspapers that arrived with breakfast told the story of their triumph. The venomous gossip column penned by Beatrice Blackwood was conspicuously absent, replaced by a glowing society feature that spoke in awed tones of the return of Alistair Blackwood and the debut of his stunning and refreshingly authentic fiancée, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Alistair's speech was quoted at length, and their love story, once a source of scandal, was now being hailed as the most romantic tale of the season. They had not just silenced their critics, they had won them over. For Eleanor, the victory was sweet, But the true prize was the quiet morning spent sharing coffee and toast with her husband-to-be, with no need for armor or pretense. He looked at her across the small breakfast table, his eyes full of a love so deep and steady, it felt like the most profound sanctuary she had ever known. "It seems we are the talk of the town," he said, a small, amused smile playing on his lips as he folded the newspaper. "And are you bothered by it?" she asked gently. "No," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I find, for the first time in my life, that I do not care what they think. The only opinion that matters to me is yours." In the weeks that followed, they planned their wedding. There were no more discussions of strategy or social battles. There was only the joyful, intimate process of creating a day that would be a true reflection of their love. They decided against a large ceremony. The grand ball had been a necessary performance for the world. Their wedding would be just for them. They chose to be married in the library. It was the room where their minds had first truly met, where they had found solace in shared stories long before they had found it in each other's arms. It was the heart of their home, and it felt like the only fitting place to consecrate their union. The guest list was small, consisting only of those who had been loyal witnesses to their journey. Jennings, the stoic butler whose quiet approval had meant so much, would stand as Alistair's best man. The few members of the household staff, who had become their surrogate family, would be their honored guests. Eleanor wrote a long, heartfelt letter to her family in Brooklyn, explaining that this quiet, private ceremony was what she and Alistair truly wanted, and promised a joyous family celebration with them soon after. The day of the wedding arrived not with a grand fanfare, but with the soft, gentle light of a crisp winter morning. Snow had fallen during the night, blanketing the grounds of the estate in a pristine, silent layer of white, making the world outside feel hushed and far away. The ceremony took place in the afternoon, in front of the grand library fireplace, which roared with a cheerful, crackling warmth. The room was filled not with elaborate floral arrangements, but with dozens of glowing candles that cast a soft, romantic light on the leather-bound books and the faces of their small, devoted audience. Alistair stood by the hearth, looking devastatingly handsome in a simple dark wool suit. He was not the nervous, haunted man of the past, but a man at peace, his eyes shining with a calm, happy confidence as he watched his bride walk towards him. Eleanor wore the pearl-grey silk dress she had so carefully chosen for that first ill-fated meeting with his investors. It was a quiet act of reclamation, transforming a garment associated with her trial into a symbol of her triumph. She carried no bouquet. Her only adornment was the beautiful sapphire ring on her finger and the radiant, joyful love that illuminated her entire being. She walked down the aisle created between the library's armchairs and took her place beside him. The town judge, a quiet elderly man and a friend of Alistair's, performed the simple secular ceremony. Their vows were the heart of it all, spoken in low, clear voices, a testament to their unique journey. "I came to you a man living in the past, a ghost in my own home," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. "You walked into my silence and taught my heart to speak again. You are my partner, my love, and my greatest treasure. With this ring I pledge you my life, my loyalty, and my love for all the days to come." Eleanor's own voice trembled, but with joy, not sorrow. "I came to you seeking only a position, a roof over my head," she said, her eyes locked with his as she slid a matching ring onto his finger. "I found instead a home for my soul. You saw a worth in me that I had forgotten, and you loved me back to life. I promise to be your comfort, your partner, and your friend. I promise to fill your home with laughter and your life with a love that is as steady and as true as your own heart." When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Alistair pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a deep, loving kiss that sealed their quiet, profound vows. The small group of servants erupted in heartfelt applause, their joy for the couple genuine and overwhelming. There was no grand reception, only a simple, elegant dinner shared by the fireplace. They drank champagne and ate the delicious food Eleanor had planned herself, her last official act as housekeeper. The conversation was filled with easy laughter and shared stories. It was a celebration of family, not the family of blood and society, but the family one chooses, the family one builds through loyalty and love. Later that night, long after the staff had retired, Alistair and Eleanor stood alone in the library, the fire now burning down to glowing embers. She was now, officially, Mrs. Alistair Blackwood. "It feels right," she said softly, as if he had asked the question aloud. "It feels like the only thing that has ever been truly right," he replied, his arms wrapping around her. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the fire, two people who had found their extraordinary love story in the quietest of places. The lonely widower and the woman he had hired only to cook were gone. In their place stood a husband and a wife, their pasts finally laid to rest, their future a beautiful unwritten book waiting to be filled with the quiet, everyday poetry of a shared life. The House of Echoes was silent no more. It was, at long last, a home. The first year of their marriage was a revelation for both Alistair and Eleanor. It was a year of quiet firsts, their first spring spent planning the gardens together, their first summer spent reading on the wide, sunny porch, their first autumn watching the leaves turn brilliant shades of red and gold along the Hudson. For two people who had spent so long defined by solitude, the simple, profound joy of companionship was a daily miracle. Eleanor, now the undisputed mistress of Blackwood Manor, brought a gentle, loving order to the house. It was no longer a silent, echoing museum, but a warm and welcoming home. The scent of her baking often filled the hallways, and the sound of her soft humming as she tended to her flowers became a part of the house's new, peaceful rhythm. She was happy, more deeply content than she had ever dreamed possible. Yet with the household running smoothly under the expert care of Jennings and the staff, she found herself with long hours to fill. Her days of necessary labor were over, leaving a void that her painting and reading could not entirely fill. She was a woman of purpose, and she yearned for a new one. Alistair, with his perceptive, loving gaze, noticed this. He saw the flicker of restlessness in her eyes, the search for a new role now that her first one, mending his heart and his home, was complete. He knew that a woman of her intelligence and compassion could not be content with a life of simple, idle luxury. The answer to her unasked question came from an unexpected place, the past. One rainy afternoon, while organizing the last forgotten corner of the vast library, Eleanor came across a locked wooden chest tucked away in an alcove. It was Isabel Blackwood's personal chest. With a sense of trepidation, she brought it to Alistair. Together they opened it. It was not filled with jewels or old letters, but with dozens of notebooks. They were Isabel's private journals, filled with her elegant, flowing script. But they were not diaries of social calls and dinner parties. They were plans, detailed, passionate, and meticulously researched plans. As they read through the journals, a portrait emerged of a woman they had never known. Isabel, it turned out, had been a quiet progressive, a woman deeply concerned with the plight of women in the city, particularly young immigrants and widows who, like Eleanor, had been left with few skills and even fewer opportunities. Her dream, the journals revealed, had been to use the Blackwood fortune to create a new kind of institution, a school for women. Not a finishing school for high society, but a practical, powerful place where women could learn the skills they needed to be independent. The journals were filled with proposed curricula, typing and shorthand, bookkeeping and accounting, even basic mechanics and electrical repair. It was a revolutionary vision of female empowerment, a dream that her sudden illness and death had prevented her from ever realizing. As they finished the last journal, a profound silence filled the library. Alistair looked at Eleanor, his eyes shining with a new, brilliant idea. "She never told me," he whispered, his voice full of a quiet awe. "She kept this part of herself hidden. I think she feared the world wasn't ready for it." "The world is more than ready for it, Alistair," Eleanor said, her own voice trembling with excitement. She looked at the detailed plans, at the passion that poured from every page. She felt an immediate, powerful kinship with the woman she had never met. This is magnificent." Her dream was to build a place of purpose, Alistair said, his gaze meeting hers. But she needed a partner with the practical wisdom to bring it to life. "She needed you, Eleanor." he took her hand. Perhaps it is not too late to make her dream a reality, our reality. And so, their new life's work began. The project consumed them, a shared passion that perfectly melded their individual talents. Alistair, with his immense wealth and business acumen, handled the logistics. He purchased a large, handsome brownstone in a respectable but accessible part of the city and oversaw its renovation, transforming it from a private residence into a modern, state-of-the-art school. He established the endowments, navigated the city's bureaucracy, and secured the necessary charters. Eleanor was the soul of the project. She took Isabel's visionary curriculum and, using her own practical, empathetic wisdom, brought it to life. She designed the classrooms to be bright and welcoming. She personally interviewed and hired the instructors, choosing women who were not only experts in their fields, but who shared their vision of empowerment. She developed a free childcare program within the school, knowing that it was the single greatest barrier for many women seeking an education. They decided to name it the Isabel Blackwood School for Women. It was a tribute to the past and a promise to the future. The day the school opened its doors was one of the proudest of their lives. They stood together at the entrance, watching as the first students arrived. They were women of all ages and backgrounds, young widows, recent immigrants, ambitious girls from poor families who dreamed of becoming more than just a wife or a servant. Their faces were a mixture of hope, nervousness, and a fierce, burning determination. Elsie recognized in them the same hunger she had once felt, the hunger for a life of purpose, of dignity, of self-worth. One young woman, a recent immigrant from Ireland with a shy smile and intelligent eyes, stopped in front of them. "Are you Mrs. Blackwood?" she asked Eleanor, her voice full of awe. "I am," Eleanor replied warmly. "Thank you," the girl said, her voice thick with emotion, "for giving us this chance, for believing in us." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed Alistair's hand, her heart full. As they stood there, watching the steady stream of women pouring into the building, a new chapter of their own story began. They had found love and healing within the quiet walls of their home, but now their love was reaching beyond those walls, becoming a force for change in the world. It was a legacy not of stone or steel, but of knowledge, of opportunity, and of the profound transformative power of giving someone the tools to build their own life. The lonely widower and the woman he hired to cook had not just mended a heart. They were now mending a world, one empowered woman at a time. The Isabel Blackwood School for Women became a beacon in a city struggling with the early tremors of the Great Depression. While financial empires teetered and the city's mood grew somber, the handsome brownstone on the east side was a hive of determined, hopeful activity. It was a place where the currency was not stocks and bonds, but knowledge and skill. Eleanor poured her entire heart and soul into the school. She was its director, its guiding spirit, its most passionate advocate. She knew every student by name, understood their individual struggles, and celebrated their every small victory. She was a mentor, a confidant, and for many of the young women who had no family in the city, she was a mother figure. She taught them more than just typing or bookkeeping. She taught them, through her own quiet example, about dignity, resilience, and the importance of believing in their own worth. Alistair, for his part, found a new and profound purpose. He had spent his life managing a vast, impersonal empire of ships and steel. Now, he was managing an empire of hope. He would spend his days in the city, using his formidable business skills to ensure the school's financial health and to build partnerships with other city leaders. But his favorite part of the day was always the late afternoon, when he would arrive at the school to collect his wife. He would often stand quietly at the back of a classroom, watching her. He would watch as she patiently guided a young woman's fingers over the keys of a typewriter, or as she explained a complex accounting principle with a simple, clear analogy. He saw the respect and adoration the students had for her, and his heart would swell with a pride so immense it was almost a physical presence. The world had once dismissed her as a simple housekeeper, but here, in this building, she was a titan, a builder of futures. 2 years after the school opened, they held the first graduation ceremony for the advanced secretarial program. The main hall of the school was filled with proud students, their faces shining with accomplishment. Alistair sat in the front row, a quiet, proud spectator. Eleanor stood at the podium to address the graduating class. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her presence commanding the room not with power, but with a warm, maternal authority. 2 years ago, she began, her voice clear and steady. Many of you walked through these doors for the first time, full of hope, but perhaps also full of fear. You lived in a world that often told you that your choices were limited, that your dreams had a ceiling. Today, you leave here not just with a diploma, but with a key that unlocks a future of your own making, a future of independence, of dignity, and of purpose. She looked out at the sea of eager faces. They will tell you the world is a difficult place right now, and it is. But you are not defined by the world's difficulties. You are defined by your own strength. You are skilled, you are intelligent, and you are resilient. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. After the ceremony, as refreshments were being served, Alistair introduced Eleanor to a man named Mr. Davies, the head of the personnel department at Kane Consolidated. He had been a guest at the ceremony at Alistair's invitation. "Mrs. Blackwood," Mr. Davies said, his expression full of genuine admiration. "Your speech was remarkable, and the caliber of these students is truly impressive." He then turned to a young woman standing nearby, the class valedictorian, a bright, determined immigrant from Italy named Sophia. "In fact, Miss Petrucci, I would be honored if you would consider accepting a position as a senior secretary in our international shipping division. Your skills are exactly what we are looking for." Sophia's eyes filled with tears of joy as she accepted the offer. Eleanor looked at Alistair, her own eyes shining. It was the perfect, beautiful culmination of their vision. They were not just teaching women skills, they were opening the doors to a new life for them. The lonely tycoon who had once hired a woman to fill his empty house was now hiring the graduates of her school to help run his empire. Later that evening, they returned to Blackwood Manor. The house was quiet, peaceful. They sat together in the library, the fire casting a warm glow on the room. "You were magnificent today," Alistair said, taking her hand. "Isabel would have been so proud of what you have built in her name." "We built it, Alistair," she corrected him gently. "I could have done nothing without you." "And I," he said, his voice full of a quiet conviction, "would have remained a ghost in this house without you. You mended more than just my heart, Eleanor. You mended my life. You gave it a purpose beyond myself." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, moonlit gardens. "I spent so many years mourning what I had lost. My brother, my wife, the man I used to be. I thought my story was over. But you taught me that a life is like this library. It is filled with many chapters, and just because one chapter is sad, it does not mean it is the end of the book." He turned to face her, a soft, contented smile on his face. "Our chapter, my love, is my absolute favorite." Eleanor went to him, her own heart overflowing with a love so deep and so peaceful, it felt as eternal as the stars outside. She wrapped her arms around him, and they stood together, two people who had found each other in the autumn of their lives and had together cultivated a harvest of hope that would feed generations to come. Their legacy was not written in stone or inscribed on a building. It was alive, breathing, and thriving in the hearts and minds of the women whose lives they had changed forever. The years flowed by like the steady, quiet current of the Hudson River outside their window. The roaring 20s gave way to the trials of the Depression and the anxieties of a world on the brink of another war. But within the stone walls of Blackwood Manor, a lasting peace reigned. Alistair and Eleanor grew old together, their love a quiet, sturdy oak in the changing forest of the world. The Isabel Blackwood School for Women became a celebrated New York institution. It flourished, expanding its curriculum and its reach, a testament to the enduring power of its founding vision. It produced a new generation of capable, independent women who entered the workforce with skills and confidence, forever changing the trajectory of their families and their communities. Eleanor remained its guiding spirit, her quiet wisdom shaping the school's mission, though she had long since passed the daily administration to one of her star pupils. Alistair, having found a purpose beyond the cold calculus of finance, dedicated his wealth and his time to supporting their foundation. He was no longer the city's most enigmatic recluse, but one of its most respected, if still private, philanthropists. The ghosts of his past had been laid to rest, replaced by the profound, quiet joy of a life filled with meaning. One crisp autumn afternoon, some 20 years after their wedding, the scent of baking apples and cinnamon drifted through the halls of Blackwood Manor. The source was the kitchen, once a cold and sterile space, now the warm, beating heart of the home. Eleanor stood at the large wooden work table, her hands now knotted with age, expertly peeling apples. Her hair was a beautiful, luminous silver, and her face was a lovely map of a life well lived, her hazel eyes still shining with the same gentle, intelligent light. Alistair entered the kitchen, moving with the familiar slight limp that no longer seemed a mark of injury, but simply a part of the man she loved. He came to stand beside her, taking another apple and a peeler, and beginning to work alongside her in a comfortable, practiced silence. This had become one of their favorite rituals. "It's ironic, isn't it?" he said, his voice a low, contented rumble. "What is, my love?" she asked, not looking up from her task. "I hired you because I needed a cook," he said, a soft smile in his voice. "I was a man living on bland, tasteless meals in a vast, empty dining room, utterly incapable of even boiling an egg. I thought what I needed was someone to feed me." He paused, placing his apple down and turning to look at her. "But what I truly needed was someone to teach me the joy of preparing a meal together. I needed someone to share the pie with. You did not just feed my body, Eleanor. You fed my soul." She stopped her work and looked at him, her heart full. "And I," she said, her voice soft, "was a woman who thought her only purpose was to serve others. I came here to care for your house. I never imagined I would be given a home, a partnership, and a love that would fill every empty corner of my heart." They looked at each other, their shared gaze a silent conversation that encompassed 2 decades of love, companionship, and shared purpose. The contract that had brought them together was a distant, almost unbelievable memory. Their true life had been built in these small, quiet moments, in the library, in the garden, and here, in this warm and fragrant kitchen. "Do you remember the first meal you brought me?" he asked. "The pot roast. I was so lost that day. You sat with me in that cavernous dining room, and you spoke of grief. You were the first person who had dared to name the ghost that haunted me. I only spoke the truth of my own heart," she said, "and I saw that it was the same as yours." "You did," he affirmed. "You have always seen me, Eleanor, truly seen me. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of silver hair behind her ear, his touch as tender and as reverent as it had been on the day he proposed. Theirs was a love story that would never be shouted from the headlines or gossiped about in society columns. It was a quiet, enduring epic, known only to them and to the people whose lives they had touched. Their legacy was not in the soaring towers of the city, but in the quiet confidence of a young woman starting her first job, in the happy laughter of children in a new community library, in the simple, profound beauty of a home filled with love. He smiled at her, a smile that still, after all these years, made her heart skip a beat. "Shall we finish our pie?" "Yes, my love," she replied, her own smile radiant. "Let's." And in the warm, golden light of the autumn afternoon, they stood side by side, 2 souls who had found their unexpected, everlasting love in the quiet winter of their lives. Life can present its most beautiful and meaningful chapters long after we believe the story has been written. True purpose is often found not in grand ambitions, but in the quiet, daily acts of caring for another. The deepest love is not one that rescues us from our solitude, but one that joins us in it, transforming a lonely house into a cherished home. Never underestimate the power of a gentle heart to heal the deepest of wounds. For kindness is the one currency whose value only grows with time.